Welcome to the Tramel Show. We're in a very special place today. We're in the office of University of Oklahoma President Joe Harroz. He's agreed to let us come down and chat about administrating at a football school. Joe, I don't know if this is your dream job, but to most of us, this sounds like a great job, being the president at a place like the University of Oklahoma. Thanks for letting us join you, and tell us a little bit about the idea of presiding over a university with such a prominent athletic department. Is it just flat out fun?
Yeah, it's always exciting. Some days are fun, some days are terrifying, but look, this is my dream job. I'm like you, I'm a native Oklahoman, and been here all my life. Born and raised here, besides 6 years on the East Coast, have been here my entire life. And my dad was the first generation in his family to go past high school, and he went to the University of Oklahoma. It changed his life. It changed my life. Now we have our oldest here is at OU. So the University of Oklahoma, they talk about sooner born and sooner bred. I am that. And I have an absolute understanding of the importance and excitement of athletics.
What is your, outside of big events or big controversies or unforeseen situations, do you have a day-to-day role with athletics or just periodic updates with Joe Castiglione? Tell us what your relationship is with the athletic department.
Yeah, I just left a meeting where all of the university officers were in there, and that includes Joe Castiglione. Around here, athletics isn't some appendage. It's a huge part of who we are. And when we look at our strategic plan, athletics is a key part of how do we create a place of belonging for our students and a way of attachment with our alumni and friends. So around here, athletics is part of our DNA, and it's a huge part of who we are. So on a day-to-day basis, there might be a day or two that goes without me speaking with Joe Castiglione, but it's not usually 3 days. We're always connected, especially during times of transition like we're in right now in intercollegiate athletics. There are so many issues that arise that aren't just about administering a team, but also the strategy and direction of intercollegiate athletics as a whole.
A couple of, I think you became interim president in 19, so I've been on the job about 4 years. A couple of major things have happened in that time. Lost and gained a football coach, changed conferences. Let's take those one at a time. University president, how involved were you and are you in like the coaching search and the coaching selection?
Yeah, so you've got to know what your lane is, and having me picking coaches is probably not a good idea. I'm a guy who got cut in 7th grade from my junior high football team, and so I'm not a great talent, nor am I a great judge of coaching or athletic talent. But I've been on the program for a long time. I've been in this job since 19, but earlier in my career here, I was there during the formation of the Big 12 Conference and played a role there in all of that. And I spent 12 years as general counsel here. I wound up as lead counsel for the 2 major infractions cases that we've had at the university over the last 25 years. So I'm not a traditional president in terms of my knowledge of how intercollegiate athletics work. So I play a role, but hopefully it's a constructive role. I've been here with Joe C. the entire 25 years he's been here. We don't just have a professional relationship. We have a deep personal and family relationship, and we work together about as well as anybody I think could.
We call him Joe C. Well, people that know you both, they call him Joe C. and you Joe what?
Joe H., if they're being kind.
Okay.
Yeah, there are other names, but that's not appropriate.
So take me back to the Lincoln Riley transition to Brent Venables. Most of us were stunned at the news that Lincoln's leaving. A week later, big pep rally for Brent. What was that whole transition like in that week of uncertainty?
Yeah, it's fascinating. The way coaches' contracts work and the way they're handled these days, it caught us by surprise. As you know, usually around bowl games with coaches, you're working on, how do you make sure that they're secure? The morning that we all found out he was leaving, I got a phone call, and Joe C. and I met with Lincoln. And I thought it was to talk about him talking with another school. But it ended up becoming clear in a meeting that the 3 of us had that he had actually taken the job. This is the Sunday after the game against Oklahoma State. And Joe and I have both been around as general counsel. I spent a lot of times around coaches' contracts and the hiring, not selection, but the process of once you've identified, how do you work through it. So it's not new territory for Joe and me. The circumstances were very different and an absolute surprise. But one thing you know is that if somebody's already made a decision and it became clear over the conversation eventually that he had taken that job, we had to move quickly. And you can't let grass grow under your feet, especially at a moment of ultimate vulnerability. Because in the past, the transfer portal hasn't been open and it hasn't been available. And so it was a unique moment in time where we had to react quickly. When Lincoln left, we met over at Boyd House. When Lincoln left, Joe C. and I were surprised. We told ourselves we needed to be professionals and we needed to take the next step. We knew we needed an interim coach. So our first phone call was to, Joe and I talked about it a bit, and our first phone call was, as you I know interviewed, was with Bob Stoops. We called him, he was on the golf course, and we told him, we asked him if he would step in, and he said he would. We then knew that Joe C. needed to get to work on selecting a coach, and he has a process for that. And so he began doing that. I said, look, Joe C., keep me aware of what you're doing. I don't pick coaches. When you get it down to your top 3 or so, bring me in, and then I'll go with you to help recruit. And that's the approach we took.
When you hired Brent Venables, the mood seemed to change among the Sooner fan base, one of shock and alarm to one of celebration and joy. And of course, that dips now depending on the scoreboard every Saturday. But were you surprised at how quickly everybody went from, sort of very scared almost to joyous in a week's time?
Yeah, I think in all my years at OU, both as a student and in various jobs here at OU, one of the most joyous moments was getting off that airplane at Max Westheimer Airport. And we knew a storm was coming in. We didn't know if there'd be very many people there. We had to circle the airport once because of the weather. And then we land, and it's just this surreal environment that just seemed magical and dreamlike. And we get off the airplane, and there's not just a few students out there. We weren't sure if the Spirit Squad could even stay out there because of the weather. And it was just this moment that was truly special. And I think the moment he stepped off the airplane, all of that anxiety and hurt, and you got to call it what it is, the Sooner Nation, we were all hurt by the way things played out. And we should have been hurt. To realizing that, look, this is way bigger than one person. As Bob said, it's a program and it's endured a lot of people, and we got our feet back under ourselves. And I love that it's always good to have a partner who's not exactly like you. Joe C. is calm. I'm going to go to, a kinder characterization with me is effervescent, which might be a little high key. And we go to meet, and Joe C. going into the meeting with Brent Venables at his place in Clemson on the lake. We're walking in there. As we walked from the car into his house, and Joe C. said, now, Joe, to me, Joe H., he's like, we're going to play this cool. We're going to go in there. We're going to meet his family, which, of course, I had known them when Brent and Julie were here before, and we're going to hear him out. And then after we hear him out, we'll confer for a few minutes, and then we're probably going to do it, but then we're going to offer him the job. But we got to handle it that way. And I said, I totally hear you, Joe. That sounds like a great plan. You're the greatest AD in the country, and I'm going to follow your lead. So we get in there, we see the kids, see Julie. Hadn't seen the kids in a long time. And we go in there, and Brent starts doing one of his speeches about why he cares about student athletes. And the view you've heard many times about how winning is a product, but we're about intercollegiate athletics and development of the whole person. He goes into full-on Brent, right? I mean, it is full-on. And honestly, with what had taken place just a week before, to hear the discussion about character being at the forefront, to hear those things that we know Brent Venables believes, that I think in many places and in many coaches is absent, this idea of you're doing it for more than just the money. It resonated. Now, that part I think is fair and logical. But then, as Brent got wound up, I got wound up, and I jumped up about what had to be I thought probably at the 80% mark in his speech, knowing what I know now, probably the 20% mark, right?
Yeah.
And I jump up and I go, "Coach, will you take the job?" Totally interrupted him. He looks at me. We stand up. We start hugging. I look at Castiglione. He looks at me like, what is wrong with you? We got a process for this. And we didn't. I decided it was time to go ahead and make the offer. And then he jumped up and we all celebrated. But it was a moment of excitement, and I think my own emotions, I think were indicative, really answer your question, which are, was it surprising to see the mood of the Sooner Nation go from where it was to a position of joy? I think the answer is it shouldn't have been. But I think like a lot of us, there was so much emotion in the way the previous coach left and the way the departure occurred, that to then see the embodiment, to me, of what we want in a coach, not just excellence in terms of being an amazing coach, but having true character and talking about those students in a way that he also lives, is a big deal. And I think that returned confidence and joy to us after we'd been knocked back on our heels.
Let's go to another big seminal moment in your administration, which is the move to the SEC. Sooners have been involved in this conference for the Big 12 and its forerunners for a century. And yet in the summer of 21, we hear the news, OU and Texas jumping to the SEC. Take us to the moment when you first heard the idea that this was even something OU should consider. How did this thing even take seed and grow into right now you're on the cusp of joining the SEC?
Yeah, so I've been around for a long time, something we share. And
I got you beat on that one.
And so I was actually there during, I was the VP for Executive Affairs during the creation of the Big 12 and attended a lot of those meetings. So I've been, and as I said, as general counsel, spent a lot of time around. So I wasn't a newcomer to conferences, the way they operate, and the changing dynamic. What had already been taking place, and I think this is illustrative of the challenges we face right now in intercollegiate athletics, and whether we're dealing with them in a really open and honest way, is that when I came into this role, I asked a couple of very seasoned people, not at OU, why things were done a certain way. And the answers were all, I thought, calcified. I thought the answers all made sense 20 years ago and were ignoring the realities of where intercollegiate athletics is today. And people that have big credentials sometimes are too close to it to see what's going on. And so there have been discussions forever. You know, we had the conversations about going to the Pac-12 that well preceded me. So the mental gymnastics of why you might change conferences had been done before. These weren't new thoughts. But the environment itself was changing so rapidly. And so when we looked at this, we being Joe Castiglione, myself, as we looked at this, we realized that after all the work we had done on this, and this was not some flight of fancy, this was a deep, thoughtful exercise. All of that work came down to two questions, as I think lots of complicated questions do when you digest them to their core. And the questions were, where do we need to be in this incredibly changing landscape? Now, this predates the decision by the U.S. Supreme Court that finally got everybody's attention. But we said to ourselves, where do we need to be to do two things? One, to compete for championships at the highest level, not just make a playoff, but actually compete for championships. And two, with the size of our budget, which is unique, how long until we lose our status as one of the few schools in America where the students don't pay for athletics, or the state doesn't pay for athletics? And when you sat down and looked at those two questions, and you look at the size of our budget, and stadium size is a proxy for budget size, right? This year we were $169 million operating budget. What does it mean if suddenly students have to subsidize 5% of that, or 10% of that, or more, which happens at a lot of universities? We realized that in our position in the Big 12, that there was no way that we could achieve those two things for the University of Oklahoma. And by our estimates, by the year 2027 or 2028, students would start picking up the tab. And the question of competing for championships, it became clear that to do so on a consistent basis, we had to be in one of two places, Big Ten or the SEC. It was just a reality, and not just from a money standpoint. TV slots, right? Across the ability to recruit, all of those things played into it for us. And anytime I sat down with the leader from Oklahoma and talked about this, no matter if they were crimson and cream or believed in orange and black, they realized that this was not just good for OU athletics, but at the end of the day, it was critical for the state as a whole. And that OSU was going to wind up in a really good spot because of their brand. And at the end of the day, the state could be in a better spot. Now, we knew it was going to be tricky. We knew it was going to be upsetting to a lot of people when it took place. But I think sitting here now 2 years later, we see those things to be true. Our state is in a better place. Oklahoma State University is in a better place. And the University of Oklahoma, with our big budget around athletics, is in a better place.
How difficult was that, though, those early days? Not just with OSU, but Texas Tech, Kansas State, Iowa State, schools that Oklahoma has been associated with, some for 100 years. Were those difficult days just to navigate the transition and the news that you guys were leaving?
Yeah, it's difficult because those presidents, you get to know them on the Big 12 board meeting calls. And those are, it's like in your business, you only have so many people that really live in your shoes every day. And those presidents are really good presidents. And they're really good friends. But, the reality of doing any job where you have, it's funny, I have friends that will see me in pictures from this weekend. And they'll be like, oh, that's a fun picture of you with the band. Your job must be easy. Well, no, it's a serious job. And as long as you're in the job, you better do the right thing the right way every time. Even if it means it's going to make you unpopular for a while. Right? Like, I'm not here to be popular. My job is to do the best I can for the state's flagship research university. And so the decision was crystal clear. There was no question it was the right call. Never doubted that once. Everything tells us that. The hard part was how do you handle those conversations and how do you handle the hurt that takes place with that? Even when you know how you think it's going to turn out, how do you manage that? And the great news is those people, now I'm not the most popular person at a Big 12 meeting, but the individuals I was friends with, we still talk. And right now I still sit on the Big 12 board. I sit as a guest on the SEC board, and now we're all locked in a common cause, which is navigating the future of intercollegiate athletics. So I think when you do the right thing for the right reasons, and your friends and colleagues know it comes from a place of principle and it matters, that time does heal those.
The SEC coming in July 1st, 2024. Excitement level and sort of apprehension level. What are you looking most forward to? But also, what's a little bit rocky, at least from the unknown standpoint of joining the SEC?
Yeah, we put a lot of time into this, a lot of thought, and so when you think deeply about something or try to, you try and narrow the unknowns. Really excited about this year being the last one of an almost 30-year run in the Big 12. With expanded playoffs, I think we're going to see a lot of these teams again, and also hopefully some non-conference games that take place. Apprehension. I look at this. I'll have friends that will. Some will say we couldn't be more excited about it. Some will say they're absolutely terrified. I know that we're ready, and so to me, I look at the calendar, and the games are going to be incredibly exciting. And so for me, it's making sure we're ready as a city of Norman for the growth. It's making sure that we're able to put forward our state in a way that helps everybody and not just OU. But in terms of the competition, it's going to be so much fun. We had the Nebraska game last season, and you think about everything that surrounds that. And then you have, we're going to begin having 3, 4, 5, 6 games a season that are like that are like what was a game every year too. So I'm incredibly excited about it.
What are the downfalls of the realignment that we've seen? Since 21, we've had USC, UCLA go to the Big Ten. Of course, Oregon, Washington joining them. Pac-12 falling apart. Most of the rest of the Pac-12 coming to the Big 12. Now we've got coast-to-coast conferences. The SEC is actually the most geographically condensed conferences. Does that worry you? The travel, the ramifications on students. The SEC's done a pretty good job of limiting that, but not everybody has. Are those issues that we're going to have to continue to deal with?
So, what I worry about is the distraction of realignment, and let me explain. There are some illogical moves, right? Having student athletes fly across the country for a cross-country meet doesn't make a lot of sense. When you look at how the realignment has taken place, there are alignments that make sense, like Texas and Oklahoma going to the SEC. That's logical for the student athlete and for the fan. When you look at some of the other realignment that's taken place, you're asking, is it really in alignment? Like, does that make sense at all? And you know what conference membership is asking before they bring somebody on. It's one, viability, and two, is it accretive to their bottom line, or does it take more money than it brings? All of that is interesting, and I think we'll eventually sort out. I think some of this was illogical, but it's missing the larger point to me, which is intercollegiate athletics is at a critical moment that requires all of the A5 to work together. Ever since that U.S. Supreme Court decision 2 years ago, everything has fundamentally changed. And when you're worrying about, and I realize if it's existential, you're going to worry about it. But outside of that, there has to be a move by the A5 commissioners and the boards, that is the college presidents and chancellors, to align around a strategy to create a vibrant and viable college sports product. And the decision 2 years ago from the U.S. Supreme Court, 9-0 decision, fundamentally changed everything. So,
and you're talking about the decision that basically opened up NIL.
It opened up NIL, and it brings into question all of the antitrust components that attach to it, right?
Right.
And so we're in an environment where that could be characterized as being unsustainable, right? I mean, think about any league that has, and I'm going to use this loosely, but think about any league that has unlimited free agency and no salary caps. Is that viable?
It's dangerous, I can say that.
Yeah. It's at least dangerous.
Yeah.
And
it's vulnerable.
It's vulnerable. That's right. And so if you take a look at where the NCAA is, that U.S. Supreme Court decision, the antitrust implications, and the fact that while you have collectives out there, it's essentially foretelling unlimited free agency and no salary caps. And that's not viable. So to me, all the restructuring and realignment, totally get it. Big 12 had to do it. Pac-12 needed to do it. Outside of that, there's got to be a comprehensive strategy or this thing's not viable in the long run.
Let's before we finish, I wanted to ask you about the job itself. You mentioned your friends who said, "I saw you with the band and all the fun things." You also have some not so fun things. Athletics are prone for scandal, like everything. We had the Cale Gundy situation a year ago, the Art Briles thing from a week or so ago. How much do you have to get involved in those things, and how difficult are they? And how do you, when you make decisions on what's best for the university, how do you arrive at those decisions?
Yeah, look, this is an unbelievable job, and I know how lucky I am every day to do it. And I've got a good colleague who I work with that on days that I get all whiny and mopey, which is totally rare. I don't do that more than
I've never seen it. No,
every other day max do I do this. And he'll look at me and he'll say, "Oh, I'm sorry." Right after I whine, he'll say, "Oh, I'm sorry. Is it hard being the president of the University of Oklahoma?" And I get the point, right?
Yeah.
Like, suck it up. You're lucky to have it. And so the job is, there's a lot to it, right? I know what the University of Oklahoma is. I get that obligation, and I work every day to be worthy of it. The two biggest users of time for a comprehensive research university that, if they have it, are athletics and academic medicine. They take the most time of any other sector of the university. And so do I spend a lot of time? Without a doubt. A lot of time. And in a day where I believe the model has to be structurally changed to be viable, there's a lot of thought that goes into big questions, big structural moves. And so a good deal of time goes into that. Now, when individual personnel issues occur because of athletics, those are always create a lot of activity and things that are going to grab public attention. This is where I know how blessed I am to have Joe Castiglione at the helm. Ordinarily, we have 2 or 3 conversations. I don't have to micromanage. Joe Castiglione knows how to keep the house in order, and he understands how to handle those matters. So those take time, not as much time as you might think. It's other issues that I think are more strategic in nature versus the sort of crisis communication component that attaches to it.
All right, we're going to finish up with a lightning round.
You bet.
Athletically speaking, we're going to ask you a few questions. Mm-hmm. Favorite moment since you became president?
Athletically for me, it would probably be at the Baylor game. This isn't intuitive, but this idea of trying to separate yourself as a fan from the profession itself. We're at the Baylor game. I'm going around with Linda Livingstone, who's the president at Baylor. I'm meeting all of her people. It's our first away game. Ashley and I are going to see all their donors, and we are getting our head kicked in. And I'm supposed to act presidential, and I'm having a hard time with it. And she's as good a person as there is. So
good Oklahoma girl.
Yeah, absolutely. Played at Oklahoma State. Yeah. And her husband's great, too. And so I had to act composed. I was dying inside. And then we had to come back. And the Stoops are good friends, and Drake Stoops had that punt return, and the ball went past his hand. We couldn't tell if he had touched it or not. And I saw him afterwards, and he looked at me, and he goes, "That was close." And so for me, it was being on the field after that comeback, just enjoying ourselves.
Favorite person in OU athletics?
Of all time?
Personally, on a personal level.
On a personal level. So on an I'm going to answer 2 ways. Aspirational level, I grew up idolizing Joe Washington. I had a Nerf football. I couldn't be trusted with a leather one. And it had his number on it, Little Joe Washington, same name, not a big guy. And so for me, that's pretty special. Favorite person, I love Joey C. I mean, I just, he and Kristen and the whole family, I just love him and I love his heart. Yeah.
Favorite venue? You get to go a lot of places. Favorite venue? You get to go athletically.
Owens Field. I mean, it's just an absolute ball. That and being at OU Texas in the Cotton Bowl when the team comes out of the tunnel, looking up at over 100,000 people, and the stadium is half orange and half crimson. That's a hard thing to not just love.
How many games a year away from football? How many events do you get to go to on a regular basis? Athletics.
Outside of football.
Outside of football. We know you're at the football games.
Yeah.
Otherwise, how much?
I'd say between softball, gymnastics, I go to at least one rest. I'd say probably 30.
One thing about being the president of the University of Oklahoma that people won't know but would be surprised if they did know.
They wouldn't know, but we'd be surprised if they did know. That there's a pressure there always to be good enough for the role. I think they sometimes look at you and they think, well, it must be a fun job, and it is. They think it must be a consequential job, and it is. But I've been around long enough to know that there's lots of folks that could be doing this job. And the biggest thing that I worry about is doing the right thing for the right reason and being worthy of the job.
Super. Joe, we appreciate you letting us embark in your office and joining the show. It's a great kickoff for Sellout Crowd.
Yeah. And
continued good luck.
Well, anything for Barry Tramel. This is a paid advertisement for Barry Tramel. He's as good as they get. It is so much fun. I know you're trying to bait me into saying my favorite person in athletics is you. But great luck with this new venture. You're thoughtful, you're insightful, you're consistent, and for a lot of us, you are athletics. So appreciate you, good luck, and thanks for being a true professional.
Well, thanks, Joe. I appreciate it. Thanks a lot. Hey, you can listen to the Barry Tramel Show at all places you get your podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts. So look us up on Sellout Crowd. Join us next week.